Welcome to the global news on October 2nd in 2021. And today, once again, we start in Pyongyang in North Korea. According to media reports, the North Korean ruler Kim Jong Un has announced the imminent reopening of communication channels with South Korea. The opening of the channels early in October should contribute to efforts to improve relations with the South and to achieve peace on the Korean peninsula. The South Korean agency Yonhap quoted from a speech by Kim at the People's Assembly in Pyongyang on Thursday. During the speech, however, Kim is said to have called a US conversation offer a pure facade. The United States was trying to cover up its dishonesty and hostility, Kim said, according to the Rodong Sinmun newspaper. Even after US President Joe Biden took office, the US military threat to North Korea and its hostile policy towards Pyongyang have not changed, Kim said in a speech to members of the Supreme People's Assembly, according to Rodong Sinmun. International peace and stability would be threatened by the abuse of power by the USA and its supporters, he said. Well, since the beginning of Biden's presidency, the administration in Washington has repeatedly emphasized its willingness to talk to Pyongyang. In order to achieve an end to the North Korean nuclear program, Washington is ready at any time to meet representatives of Pyongyang anywhere and without preconditions, emphasized US government officials. North Korea, on the other hand, has shown no willingness to give up its arsenal. Meanwhile, the United Nations has called a crisis meeting after the allegedly successful hypersonic missile test of Pyongyang. The UN Security Council is meeting this week for an emergency meeting on the situation in North Korea. The AFP news agency learned from diplomatic circles, but it hasn't happened when I had to film this video. The meeting requested by the USA, Great Britain and France is to take place in the morning there behind closed doors. North Korea said it had tested a Hwasong-8 missile on Tuesday. State media celebrated the missile test as a step of great strategic importance. North Korea wants to expand its defense capacities by 1,000-fold, wrote the official news agency KCNA. Hypersonic describes speed above 5 times the speed of sound. Hypersonic missiles are also more flexible than conventional missiles, which makes their destruction by missile defense systems very difficult. According to the KCNA, the development of a hypersonic missile was one of the 5 top priorities of the Pyongyang leadership's 5-year armaments plan. The internationally largely isolated North Korea is subject to strict US and UN sanctions because of its nuclear and missile program. Around 28,500 US soldiers are stationed in South Korea to protect the country against the threat from the north. Talks between North and South Korea have largely stalled since the summit between Kim Jong Un and then US President Donald Trump in Hanoi in 2019, which really failed. Seoul is also investing billions in weapons development. Recently, Seoul tested a submarine-based ballistic missile for the first time. A ceremony was held on Tuesday to commission a submarine capable of carrying ballistic missiles. Observers fear an arms race on the Korean peninsula, which could also affect Japan and China. And now we have to go to Paris in France. Angela Merkel's exit from the EU stage, which she dominated for 16 years, has handed French President Emmanuel Macron an opportunity to take up the mantle of European leadership and press on with its plans for a more independent Europe. Not so fast. Diplomats from countries across the European Union are saying, at least. The energetic French leader has sought to bring a clarity of strategic vision that the Union under Merkel, often dubbed the Queen of Europe, at times lacked, and Brussels has often adopted his vernacular. But the Queen of Europe stuff is BS, by the way. Everyone has the same vote, but leave the picture to them. But in a post-war Europe founded on consensus, Macron's direct and abrasive style, coupled with a willingness to go it alone in a bid to shape EU strategy, means he will struggle to fill Merkel's shoes, senior diplomats across the region said. It's not like Macron can lead Europe alone. No, he has to realize that he has to be careful. He can't expect people to jump on the French bandwagon, one diplomat posted to Paris from one of the EU's founding nations. Merkel had an extraordinary place. She was listening to everyone, respectful of everyone. Tellingly, Macron found few swift voices of support among European allies when Australia scrapped a mega defense deal for submarines from France. The silence pointed to deep opposition among Central and European countries, with Macron's vision of European defense autonomy and a reduced reliance on US military protection from Russia. Despite an effort to show Eastern EU countries more love than past French presidents, countries from the Baltic to the Black Sea, which see the United States as the only credible shield from Russia, were appalled when Macron called NATO brain dead and urged dialogue with Moscow. Macron's office did not reply to a request for comment on the criticism by German media. French officials admit privately his strategy to engage Russian President Vladimir Putin has yielded scant results. We could have told him how this Russia policy would end up, an ambassador to France from an Eastern European country scoffed. We understand Macron needs contacts with Russia. Merkel did too. But it's the way he went about it. To be sure, Merkel also pushed projects that deeply divided EU members, such as the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Germany. But she was always careful to avoid the kind of defiant rhetoric that Macron has been accustomed to, the diplomat said. France has a vision, but it's often too assertive, and Macron's leadership can sometimes be disruptive, said Georgina Wright of the Institut Montaigne, the think tank in Paris. The Franco-German tandem is very important, but Macron, to his credit, realizes it isn't enough, she added. Several diplomats cited two leaders who would be crucial to Macron's future success in Europe, regardless of the outcome of Germany's coalition negotiations after last week's election, in which Merkel's Conservative Party slumped to a record low result. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi and Dutch Prime Minister Marc Rutte. Macron has already started to woo Draghi, a respected former European Central Bank chief credited with saving the euro, inviting the Italian to a summer retreat before the visit was cancelled because of turmoil in Afghanistan, a source said. He has also started to engage with Rutte, who has successfully united a group of fiscally conservative countries known as the Frugals. Macron once told Rutte, "You are becoming more like us, and we are becoming more like you," a diplomat familiar with the exchange said. All five senior diplomats media spoke to said many EU countries were now coming round to Macron's ideas. Capitals that once saw talk of protecting European companies from Asian or American rivals as French fats are now less reluctant after Beijing and Washington adopted more aggressive policies. He seemed a bit radical, but we discovered some of the things he pushed for were quite sensible, a diplomat from a Baltic country said. Brexit too has shifted the dynamics within the Union as France prepares to take up the rotating presidency of the EU in January. At the moment it's Slovenia. We used to be able to hide behind the British, but we lost a big back to hide behind, the diplomat said. So we are starting to reach out. Well, I see it differently, but leave it to the diplomats. And now we go to Berlin in Germany. According to an internal announcement by the Federal Ministry of the Interior, around 200 people are to be brought from Afghanistan to Germany via Pakistan over the next 2 months. This is reported by the German magazine Spiegel. Accordingly, these are local workers and other people in need of protection as well as their core families. In August, the German Bundeswehr flew more than 5,300 Germans, other foreigners and Afghan local staff out of Kabul in an airlift that was quickly set up. They were brought to safety from the militant Islamist Taliban. After the last US soldiers withdrew a few weeks ago, many Afghans are still waiting to leave the country. Those who are now to be evacuated by the Federal Foreign Office are on a list for local staff or on a human rights list. The latter includes the names of thousands of people who are particularly dependent on protection and have a connection to Germany. Anyone who is noted on one of the two lists and who enters Germany after a security check will initially receive a residence permit for up to 3 years. According to confidential documents from the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, many people who have flown to Germany so far have not been on either of the two lists mentioned. It is therefore unclear how they left the country. They would now face an asylum procedure that they have to go through. And now we will go to Washington in the United States of America. The US military has disclosed numerous misjudgments when withdrawing from Afghanistan and warned of the threat of terrorism. It is clear, it is obvious that the war in Afghanistan did not end on the terms we wanted, said Chief of Staff Marc at a Senate hearing on Tuesday. That terror groups like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda could try to attack the USA from Afghanistan is a very real possibility. Milley warned then President Donald Trump and his successor Joe Biden of the dangers of a quick exit. The last US troops left Afghanistan at the end of August. This ended the international military operation in the country after almost 20 years. And so did the military evacuation mission for Western citizens and vulnerable Afghans. In the midst of the evacuation operations, dozens of Afghans and 13 US soldiers were killed in a terrorist attack in front of Kabul airport. The IS, hostile to the radical Islamist Taliban, claimed the attack for itself. The Taliban took power in Kabul in mid-August. Milley emphasized that he had already warned in autumn 2020 that withdrawing troops from Afghanistan too quickly could lead to a complete takeover by the Taliban or to a general civil war. That was a year ago and my assessment has remained the same to this day, he said. Absolutely did not see the rapid collapse of the Afghan military and government coming, Milley said. Secret services had expected the Taliban to come to power in late autumn or winter, perhaps also next spring. And what happened? Milley and General Kenneth McKenzie, the US commander in charge of the region, also said they personally believed it was better to keep about 2,500 US soldiers in the country. However, the two evaded questions about what and when they advised the president of the question. McKenzie simply said, "I'm sure the president heard all of the recommendations and listened to them very carefully." Biden announced in April that all US soldiers would then be unconditionally withdrawn from Afghanistan by September 11th at the latest. In July, Biden moved the full withdrawal date to August 31st. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki was also evasive about the specific recommendations Biden had received from whom before his decision. She stressed that there were different points of view. The president has asked for clear recommendations without glossing over and welcomed openness and debates with his advisors. But he doesn't always agree with every piece of advice. In the end, regardless of the advice, the decision is his. He is the commander-in-chief. He is the president, said Psaki. And Biden decided to end the war after 20 years. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin admitted that at the Senate hearing that the level of corruption and bad leadership in the Afghan leadership had not been recognized. Nor was it seen at the Doha agreement with the Taliban had demoralized the Afghan armed forces. Under Trump, the United States had agreed with the Taliban that they would withdraw by May 1st. The agreement was signed in the Qatari capital Doha. The agreement actually aimed at a political solution. Milley, McKenzie, Austin, and the trigger were heavily criticized at the Senate hearing. The chaotic situation in August was avoidable. Now they have to negotiate with terrorists, complained the highest-ranking Republican on the Defense Committee, Jim Inhofe. Biden also left Americans in Afghanistan, he said. Austin admitted mistakes but also defended that the military evacuation operation ended with the withdrawal of US troops on August 31st. The Taliban had made it clear that their cooperation would end on September 1st, he said. Of course, none of this was perfect. Milley also responded to his phone calls to China shortly before the US election and after the Capitol attack in January. Two renowned investigative journalists made this public in September. My job at the time was to prevent an escalation, said Milley. He was also convinced that then President Trump did not want to attack the Chinese. It was his direct responsibility to convey this to the Chinese, Milley said. He reported the calls to senior government officials. He had come under fire for the phone calls. He was accused of exceeding his authority. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.